high atop the pastoral center of the Diocese of Camden, you're listening to Talking Catholic.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Talking Catholic. I'm Jen Mauro, and with me, as usual, Mike Walsh.
Hi, Jen.
Hello, Michael.
That took a deep breath to lean into. I was listening to a couple of recent podcasts, and I think I need to go back to broadcasting school, which I've never attended, because the last couple of ones I've been excited, and the one about the
science.
The science one, and even before that, the coadjutor one.
Coadjutor.
Coadjutor. Gee, I did it again. In my head, it's terrible. Coadjutor. I find that I've devolved into a classic Philly accent where I'm literally running all my words together now.
Oh.
And not leaving spaces in between, almost to the point of ramble. So I really think I need to go back and start being more precise with my speech.
Do you think you have to slow down? Because I don't consider you a fast talker.
No. I usually like to stroll my way through a conversation.
Just like you walk.
Exactly. But the last couple of episodes, I don't know if I was just too ginned up or too tired or too punchy, but I got to work on that. So, dear listeners, I apologize for at least for the last couple of weeks, that I have not been giving you the audio quality you deserve. So I'm going to work on that.
But listeners, I think you may have gotten a treat in the last two podcasts, because that means Mike Walsh was excited about something.
That is also unique. That is true. Mm-hmm. Well, don't worry about it today, dear listeners. I couldn't be any less excited. So this is actually, though, you should listen, because this is a good episode. We actually recorded the interview part the day before, right after this great event that Jen was a part of, that I'm not entirely certain that I still know the title for. But it was right after the event closed, and she and her fellow presenters were quite punchy and enthusiastic and energized, coming off of what was very much a great presentation from all accounts that I've heard so far.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so very, very pleased about that. So anyway, we'll get to that in about 7.5 minutes with a secondary introduction. But yeah, no, it's been a good week. So the Catholic Star Herald had an off week this week, so I feel like well, all right, good point.
I'm going to interrupt.
Week.
I'm interrupting. The Catholic Star Herald. I'm taking the gum out of my mouth. The Catholic Star Herald is on a non-publishing week, but we have been covering high school graduations in live time since Sunday, June 2nd.
True.
So if you've been following Catholic Star Herald or South Jersey Catholic Schools or Diocese of Camden social media, which I hope you have, we have been posting every single graduation as soon as they happen, some videos during the graduations, and there are literally hundreds of photos on our website, so come check them out, because we have photo galleries from all of our diocesan high schools: Holy Spirit High School in Absegin, Wildwood Catholic in Wildwood, Gloucester Catholic, which was held in Blackwood, Paul VI in Haddonfield, and Camden Catholic in Cherry Hill, which is the last one, and we're having a blast. And my sometimes co-host, Mike Bress, and I have been working like two peas in a pod, because he's on the scene at all of them and getting us information. And it's been a really, really big week. And we're going to have a huge issue. The 14th is 48 pages of graduation and priest assignments. So Pick it up.
Yeah. The next edition is going to be a bulky one, which is good. We like having a nice hefty newspaper. I was actually looking at some of our sister papers recently, and I went, boy, man, we really put out some big editions, comparatively speaking. So you, when you have the Catholic Star Herald, you are getting a paper chock full of Catholic information in there. And sometimes we got to scrape the bottom of the barrel to find it. But oh man, is it there?
There's little tears, a lack of sleep, but a lot of soul and spirit.
Yes, and occasionally blood and fights, but that's all right. That's good too.
No blood.
And a lot of long hours as well. But it will be a hefty thing, and when we have a big edition, that also means you're going to get a lot of national and international news that comes with it as well, which is good actually, because we actually love that when we can get a little OSV in there and a little CNS and CNA from our providers. We don't get to feature them often because we actually do such a great job of local content. But I enjoy it because I like seeing the national news every now and again and the international news because, quite frankly, except for us, nobody else puts that out in the South Jersey area because none of the secular news stations have religion reporters anymore or religion beats. So I want that stuff out there.
Well, it's important because
it is.
When you hear, I know we've talked about this before, but when you hear religious news told in a secular way, it can be misconstrued.
Yes,
or
easily.
Biased.
Yes.
So I'm putting the gum back in my mouth now.
I was going to say, this is a weird...
This is an odd podcast because I walked in with this gum in my mouth and I'm like, this is unprofessional. But it's still in there.
Except for when you're having a conversation and I'm looking at it in your fingertips.
Yeah, sorry, don't look over here. But
jeez. If there's one thing we're known for in the communications department in this diocese, it's all the class. We're a classy bunch.
It's true.
No, we're a bunch that gets a job done. Actually, I was reminded of something today that, I know I like to shiv the other dioceses whenever possible, but I heard some feedback about something recently, and it was another case, not related to the communications department. It was another case where our friends in the Diocese of Camden really shone in the state because of something they were very forward thinking about and really made a big difference. And I was very excited about that. It made me very happy.
I can't wait to hear more about this off air.
I doubt you will.
I doubt I will too.
but it made me very happy, and I was very excited about that. And I was like, all right, well, that's good. It's I know I catch a little bit of hell from people from time to time because I am very I often say I'm not an advocate for for anything. Like, I'm not that kind of PR guy.
You say that, but
the truth of the matter is I'm very much an advocate for the work that's done at the diocesan level. I really do think almost everything that we do is as good or better than anybody else across the board. And I say that because I've seen what a lot of other places do, and darn it, we're pretty good at it.
Darn it, we're good.
We are. So, by the way, what was the title of yesterday's presentation? Because I'm not entirely certain we said it during the interview. Oh, boy, this is... Because you spent weeks working on your presentation. Let me rephrase that. You spent weeks stewing about your presentation, and you may have spent 48 hours actually working on it.
That's actually a shocking development, not true.
Oh, wow.
Because you are right. As a journalist, I work better under pressure, but this is one of those projects that you have to work on in advance. So to me, that just prolongs the stress. So that's why I'm not good at planning in advance, because I'm like, oh, that's stressful. Not planning, but working on a project. But I actually started this project a month ago. So, yeah.
So did you figure out the title of it yet?
Well, believe it or not, in my discussion, I talk a lot about writing tips, and one of the things I talk about, and you'll hear about this in a few minutes, listeners, is how you like to write, whether you like to write on a computer or on a piece of paper. So last night, I put my money where my mouth is, so to speak, and because I actually do write on paper, so I'm sitting here, Mike is looking, there are 3 pages of handwritten notes, except they're not notes, this is actually my story. This is the story that will appear in the Catholic Star Herald, written in pencil on 3 pieces of notebook paper.
Surprisingly legible. I can actually read it from here.
Yeah, not bad, right? And I even numbered them. No, the answer is I didn't write down the title.
Of yesterday's presentation
well, basically, the title was "Why Do We Stay? Why do you stay? Why do you stay in the Catholic Church?" And that was the overall title for the entire all the slides.
And
Why
the
do
audience,
you stay?
And the audience for that was.
The audience for that is directors of religious education / parish catechetical leaders, with the idea of, if you don't know why you stay in the Catholic Church, how can you tell or advise or teach others to stay or come into the Catholic Church? So it was all about finding your stories so that you can relate to those stories to evangelize to others.
Well, it was a fascinating discussion. It was a fascinating podcast afterwards, sort of an abbreviated version of the 7 hours of presentation. And it was a very nice event. I caught the last half hour of it. I tried to miss the entire thing, but you guys ran long, so I ended up seeing the last half hour of it. But I was able to leave before the prayer time started, so I dodged a bullet there. But I actually went to the church and kind of just sat quietly in front of, our Lord and Savior.
Oh, that's why you were so, silent on the podcast for the rest of after this. Everybody, you're going to hear mainly me and our guests. Mike is much more quiet.
Yeah, because I couldn't get a word in edgewise. It was great.
It was really great.
It was actually a great conversation. I was happy to be there, to be a part of it, and it was wonderful. So all that being said, we're now going to turn it over to us.
Jennifer Merkel Mauro, I have heard nothing but great things about what a wonderful job you did during the presentation that I was absolutely not there for today, but did show up at the very end just in time to scurry out before they started praying.
I did see that, by the way.
That was...
I think you were here just in time also to steal a couple cookies.
Oh yeah. I'd like to thank Bagliani's for their delicious cookies. Thank you to the Hamilton, just iconic delicatessen.
They have the best rainbow cookies.
They do.
As a matter of fact, when I saw them, I was like, oh no. And I ate. What did you say? You came over and you're like, Jen, I have something important to ask you. How many of those cookies did you eat? I was like, I ate 4 in a minute. And that's a true story. Because they have the best rainbow cookies.
They do. Italian rainbow cookies are fantastic at Bagliani's. So now that we've got those out of the way.
Right.
Why were you people here today? Because I know you think that I know why you asked to do this presentation and not be in the office today. Mm-hmm. But what was it actually that you guys were doing
Well,
today?
because it's not my brainchild, I don't feel like I am qualified enough to do it justice. So I think we should bring our guests in right away.
Okay.
And they are going to bring themselves in today, and then they are going to tell... Lee is going to start off by telling us what it's about. But first, let's bring in the guests in.
So, Donna, what's your full name and what's your title?
Haven't I been on this podcast enough? I could just say Donna. Everybody knows who I am.
Actually, you probably can.
It's true.
Donna Ottaviano-Britt, Director of the Office of Discipleship and Leadership.
As well as?
Lee Miranda DelleMonache, Director of Religious Education.
Yay. Now let's insert like that applause, like the round of
sure.
applause. Yay.
Oh, you should do sound effects.
And yes,
There's an
we should
idea.
record it, just like John Kalitz wants us to do it, video it, and then we should do that. So yes, today we are the 3 ladies, us 3, spent the day in
3 wise women.
Oh, I like that. We spent the day in Hamilton at St.
Anthony of Padua.
Right? Take it, Lee.
St. Anthony of Padua Church and Hall at St. Mary of Mount Carmel Parish in wonderful Hamilton, New Jersey. And today actually was the result of a reflection that I read by Dan Salucci, who is the CEO of the Catholic Leadership Institute. In fact, as I'm saying that, I should probably reach out to Dan to tell him that he inspired this. So I will be doing that tomorrow, in fact. But Dan, thank you. Dan wrote a reflection back in, I think it was early February, and the title of it was called Stay. And in it, he recounted an experience that he had at a conference of Catholic leaders from across the country. And he was sharing data on one of the presentations. He was sharing data on mass goers and tendencies of mass goers. And someone in the audience challenged him and said, well, you're preaching to the choir. What are the people not going to mass saying? We need to find out more information on that. So they brainstormed about ways to collect that data and get good information to help parishes move forward. Later that day at Mass, the gospel that they used for the Mass was the Bread of Life discourse. And that is where Jesus is essentially explaining what the Eucharist is. He is the bread of life. And people had a hard time accepting his story, accepting that. And they left, and folks that were with him had been following him for a while and bailed. They left. They didn't like it. So he turns to his apostles, and he turns to Peter and said, are you going to leave me too? And Peter turns to him without hesitation, says, no. Where else am I going to go? You have the words of eternal life. So he knew why. Well, from that, the presider in his homily recounted that part of the gospel and challenged the congregation and essentially saying, are you like Peter? Can you answer that question? Do you know why you stay? So that question just resonated with Dan. And later in the day, he was talking with other people. He circled back, I believe, with the person who had challenged him earlier in the day, saying, we need to know from folks who aren't coming to Mass. And they talked about the homily. They talked about the reactions to it. And Dan, it hit him. He said, well, if we don't know or can't share why we stay, could that be one of the reasons why people leave? And that statement really knocked me. And for the mere fact that I sat back and said, if somebody said to me, why do you stay Catholic? What would my answer be? And I stumbled. I struggled with that. I really had to pray and reflect on it. And I finally did come up with what my answer would be, but then I realized I've got a lot of answers. Well, how do I sort through all this? And the idea came to me that it's through stories. All this, to share my experiences would enable me to be able to share why I stay. So brought the idea to you, Jen. As I'm thinking, we're talking about stories. Let me talk to a reporter, a journalist. Brought the idea to Donna. I brought the idea to Bill Watson, the superintendent of schools and secretary for Catholic Education, my colleagues in that Office of Education. I said, is there something here? And got everyone's feedback. And, there is something here. There is something here. And from that, we built a beautiful day.
And the day was, for the first time anyway, we're aimed at PCLs.
Parish catechetical leaders. We invited the parish catechetical leaders of each parish of our diocese. About half came, accepted the invitation and came, and they really trusted us because it was a different kind of day. It's not something that they're used to because it was retreat-like, but it was also workshop-like, and you don't usually marry those two things together. So we were very upfront with what the day was going to be, and they said yes, and they accepted the invitation and trusted us. And that to me is the greatest privilege, is that they trusted us to lead us through. And they surrendered themselves to the process and to the day. And I think we really had a special day.
Yeah, so it was all about, asking yourself, why do I stay? And then with Donna's help, finding the story about why you stay. And then I gave some tips about how to write that when it comes to why I stay. And like you said, there was a good number of people. And in addition to listening to the presentations, they had the opportunity throughout the day to journal their thoughts, journal their stories, find their stories, and then write them. And then there was a lot of sharing afterward. That
was an absolute privilege because you go into this and you're not sure how people are going to respond, and they're like, this is a little loopy. Like, what are these ladies doing up there? But they were lovely, and I ripped the Band-Aid off and I shared my story, and what was so just gave me such a joy is in watching the reactions of people, just in the nodding and in the smiling, I felt that before. Like you could tell they related to what I was sharing. And that, in my study of storytelling, that is key. Stories work when the listener relates to what they're hearing. They can picture themselves in there. Maybe they've experienced something similar. Maybe it's completely foreign, but they could picture themselves there. And that, to me, is key. So if you can find, and you can, and that was the other point we drove home, identify those experiences of your journey, of your entire life. And then the goal of today was for our PCLs to prepare them and essentially build their own little toolbox. So that way they have a whole bunch of stories ready, and that when the opportunity presents itself, they would be able to share it.
And I think, Donna, really, you took it home because, today is built for the PCLs. But one of the reasons I thought this also might make a good podcast is because it's for all of us, because we're all disciples. So I thought maybe we could all just give a quick synopsis of what we talked about to give our listeners a little touch about, wait a minute, why do I stay, and how can I find out that reason why? What do you guys think about that?
I think
It's a fabulous idea, Jen.
I mean, we just did it for the last
we just did it
7 hours, so can we wrap it up in 30 minutes, ladies?
Well, we spent the first part of the day essentially talking about storytelling and why they're so valuable, which I touched on already. And then Donna, I'm going to turn it over to Donna now. She helped lead a process of really self-discovery, of rediscovering those experiences of our lives, going back and looking to see where those moments were that impacted the why we stay.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks for that intro and setup. I do appreciate that. But I had the privilege of leading the second part of our morning, and really the importance of anchoring, like, why do we want to do this? Who's done this before us? And so anchoring to those first century disciples and the apostles and them going forward, and them actually sharing their relationship that they had with Jesus. They did that, and they did it to the point of martyrdom. Okay, so we're at a very low likelihood for martyrdom. So we should also be sharing the stories that we have had, our faith stories, times that are sad, times that are filled with joy, long, hard, suffering seasons of our life. And can you look across those stories and think, how might my stories help another person? Right? And if it answers the question, why do I stay? then these are really significant pieces. And sometimes we did a lot of work today, like fleshing out stories from the beginning to the end. You may not always tell the entire story, but because you know your story so well and you know all the details of it, that when the Holy Spirit prompts you to share even just a piece of that story with another human being, that becomes the significant piece. And so taking an opportunity to realize, Lee said it first thing this morning, is like Jesus is the master storyteller. Yeah. He did it all through the New Testament. But even thinking about the Old Testament and the stories we know from the Old Testament, they're all stories that were created by God the Father in the Old Testament, and the way that the prophets came forward and the way he inspired them and blessed them to give the message to the people. But I think it's really important for people to look across their entire lives. We have a tendency to look maybe more recently. So what we asked the PCLs to do today, and so we gave them this whole list of prompts, which we should put in the show notes.
Yeah,
so everybody has them, right?
Yep.
Is to put this list of prompts in there, because it really, and it's not a finite list. It's all these different ways to think about, how am I going to find my story? You know, because really, Lee, you said it earlier, it's like, I don't have a story. Yes, you do. You actually have a boatload. You have a boatload of stories that you could tell people that are tied to like why you stay. And so looking at the prompts and then looking across your life. So we gave the PCLs this timeline on a piece of paper, and we said, put your birthday at the top, because that's where it starts. It probably starts way back in eternity, but we didn't go there, right? We decided eternity is too big for the human mind. So put your birthday at the top of the sheet. And then come through like early childhood, your teenage years, young adulthood, all the way up to today. And where are all of the things that you have experienced, encountered, that you gave an encounter to someone else, someone gave an encounter to you, somebody witnessed to you. You had these amazing experiences that give you goosebumps and chills, made you cry, gave you joy, and you know God is in it. And that's what those first century disciples and the apostles did. They told the stories of him, but they told their stories of themselves with him. We have that. Just because he's not physically present as a body with us day to day, he is in the Eucharist, and we could go there. But I just think there's a real opportunity to share why we stay that's tied to the experiences we have had. We just need to look at them, because your life is filled with them.
Mm-hmm. And, I think that one thing that kind of like stuck out with me is when we were talking about that, that we have those stories. And then we were addressing the PCLs today, and so they're going to take it back to their students, RCIA classes. But it was also mentioned, that these stories and these encounters, this is how, what am I trying to say? And these encounters, we reveal Jesus, right? And it doesn't have to be only in the church setting, in the pews, or in the classes. The world needs hope and a reason to believe, right? That's what you said, Donna, and I loved that. And then you asked everybody in the room, how many people have you even run into before you got in here today? And we all, I think, had come together at like 9 o'clock. And somebody said they'd already seen 10 people that day. And in my mind, I was like, oh, God bless you. I don't have that much energy. I saw 0 people today, and I'm feeling pretty good about that. And she saw 10 people. That means you've had 10 opportunities already to reveal Jesus to somebody. And so when you were talking about finding that story, I was like, if you already have your story ready to go, it doesn't have to be a long story, even just a snippet of it, you had 10 opportunities to share a little bit of Jesus today.
Right. Yep,
I think
exactly.
The beautiful part in that, Jen, that you're talking about is that, today we were at a retreat/workshop in front of a group of 35 people and shared our stories. But more often than not, I think, especially with the group that we were with today, they're going to have opportunities in one-on-ones, in small group settings. And to have this toolbox, or in their back pocket, this whole list of stories that they can bring out and tell, they're going to have such holy moments. And that and Donna re-emphasized this in her presentation later, but in those intimate moments when you do share something of the Lord, you reveal something of the Lord, that human moments turn sacred. And I quoted my mother. That was my mother, one of her favorite sayings, a human moment turned sacred. And that's a gift. And if we can have more of that in our life, boy, that's a pretty good day.
Yeah, I agree.
Right, and that's why we call it the sacrament of the present moment. It's like, can I be fully present to the person that is in front of me? Can I not be addicted to my phone or distracted or thinking about 1,000 other things? But can I be fully present to the person that is in front of me? Listen, the scripture is filled with that of Jesus. He was fully present to the people that he talked to. And you know that that's part of what drew them in, is his attention on them. First of all, it was God, so that would be pretty overwhelming. But he gave them his undivided attention. And he told stories. And he listened to theirs. Hence my Road to Emmaus one more time.
Right.
Because it's my favorite.
And it's a good one. And then, the idea with the thread, how we're all connected. Oh, you got to say that again. 'Cause I loved it. Do you know how you said it? If not, I quoted it.
It'll be in the paper next week.
It'll be in the paper.
And I don't even really need to quote
you
it,
have
but
to.
I think it's these links in a chain and these bonds of connection. And I often like the describing us as threads, right? Threads are weak. Ropes are not. Ropes are made of threads, and that is who we should seek to become. Like, we are all part of a great, strong rope. And it's to give people hope and to give them a reason to believe. Because currently, and look, I think forever, the world is a hurting place. People are in need of love. They're in need of healing. They need a place to belong. And how do we build that for them? We build them through our stories. Did I get my quote right, Jen? I'm trusting
pretty
on.
close.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Good.
Thread.
Yeah.
Threads are thin, but threads make rope, and rope is strong.
Yes. Okay, there we go.
There it is.
Thank you,
right
Jen,
there.
for writing that down. Good reporter. Wrote down what I said earlier.
Mike, is this giving you a little bit more insight about what today was about?
Oh, yeah. And to our listeners who have noticed that I haven't spoken for 16 minutes, as I left the office today to come down to Hamilton, Maria said, "Oh, you're going to have a great conversation with Lee and Donna and Jen." I said, I won't have much to say at all because those three are going to be able to take up all the time, and it's going to be wonderful. So this is a nice break for me. I get to sit back and actually appreciate this. It's funny. One of the things you mentioned is something that I've lamented on this podcast before is that, in my current job, it's my job to help our evangelizers evangelize, right? And I've been happy to do that for the last 8.5 years. But one of the things that I lament is the fact that in this job I think this came up earlier, regarding preaching to the choir. When I was out in the secular world, I was an interesting character in the sense that I was a Catholic in secular life, and I was very rarely surrounded by other Catholics. So I was the token Catholic in all my jobs. So I had the great pleasure and I thought, important task to represent the Catholic Church positive. And this is before I ever worked for the diocese. I mean, this is what little of a sinful, bad Catholic that I was, I still thought I had to represent the Catholic faith while I was out there. And people would come to me and go, the most famous thing that happened when I was working in secular life was when Pope Benedict XVI resigned. And that very morning, everybody came to me like, all right, I needed to. What is this all about? Please tell me everything about the Catholic and why a pope doesn't resign and why this is so unique and stuff like that. But it wasn't just for moments like that. It was for opportunities where I got to have different kinds of conversations, like why am I still a Catholic even at that period? A lot of terrible things had come out. The Spotlight stories, not the movie, but the actual stuff in Boston had hit when I was a working professional, and there were a lot of people that would ask me, why do I stay? And are all the priests like that? And all these very difficult topics. And I felt. Thankfully, and I don't know why I felt this way, I felt empowered to talk as a Catholic about my faith and about why I do stay and how it's, that was a terrible moment in Catholic history. But, it's so many of the people I've met over my years before I worked for the diocese, particularly the priests I'd worked with or been taught by or had been my pastors or my priests, I was able to talk about that stuff and why I did remain and why I still to this day I think the Catholic Church is still one of the greatest forces for good on the planet, if not the greatest force for good on the planet. And, I do think that positively representing that in your personal life is incredibly important, which is why I've been saying for years, and it's a little off topic, in my professional goal as the person who helps the evangelizers evangelize, trying to get them out of their shells, whether it be our priests or our religious or our seminarians or our lay leaders, and making yourself present in public life and showcasing your faith and all the benefits that the Catholic Church brings to the worldwide stage, not just from the Vatican level, but in our own towns and neighborhoods and things like that. And we really, I think, going back to the difficulties of the early 2000s, I think there's been a reticence for a lot of Catholics to feel empowered to speak positively and publicly about their faith, and anything that we can do to encourage them and give them know that they should feel supported in doing that, and that they are representing positively the community, and the responsibilities that come with that. I think that's important, and I think that this kind of event, particularly talking to the PCLs, because they're going to bring it back hopefully to their people and talk with their colleagues that weren't present today. I think that's a really important thing, in addition to how important this podcast is. So yeah, I mean, hey, let's
make sure to plug the podcast.
Exactly. Hey, listen, we're important. I've gotten a ton of feedback recently on some of our episodes about people who I didn't think listened to the podcast did, and were really. By the way, Father Rox has a whole new group of people that have fallen in love with him because of his recent episode about Bishop Williams and what a coadjutor is. But no, things like that are really good. So the fact that you've empowered, not just empowered, but given a toolbox to these professionals is so important.
And that idea that it is scary to tell our faith stories. I mean, today during the day, there were people, I think, 6 or 7 people shared their stories that work in the diocesan offices. I've had the pleasure of working with, Catholic schools and Donna for 3 years now. I had never heard any of the stories that were told today. And they were personal. Some were funny. Some were, you needed the Kleenex nearby and, cry it out. And it takes a lot of guts to get up and tell a story. It takes a lot of guts to tell a story at all. And, I'm always honored when, as a reporter, somebody shares their story with me, because it takes a lot to trust somebody else with that story and what you'll do with it, and not just writing it down, but you might end up sharing that story with somebody else. So it takes a lot. And in today's time, we spoke a lot about just telling your story, like running into somebody in the grocery store and you tell your story. Like I said, like the 10 people you might meet before 9 o'clock. But there's also, especially for, depending on the generation, social media. Like we are almost, I would say, quite a little PTSD from the social media, because we know as soon as we put something on, we're going to get attacked. And it doesn't have to be about faith. It can be about anything. I made a joke today about how to find time to find your story and write your story, and that there is time out there to be found. We do have the time. I spend an hour a day watching cat videos from 10 to 11 p.m.
That was a great confession, Jen.
It is a true story.
That's what was brave.
But you know what? There are negative comments on the cat videos. I don't think that's funny. Did the cat get hurt? Da, 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 da. And I was like, oh my goodness. I mean, my point is, if a cat video can get negative comments, it is terrifying to put yourself out there.
And I appreciate you underscoring the courageous part, because it is. You need a little ounce of bravery in order to do what we did today. That's why I am just incredibly grateful to my colleagues in the Office of Education and to the two of you for saying yes to this, and with really not much prodding. I really didn't have to twist anybody's arm.
That is shocking now that I think about it.
So I kind of think that we do have these stories, and we want to tell them, and we gave a safe space to tell them today. And maybe that's the key, is to find those safe spaces where we can share them. But modeling is a key, and as leaders in the diocese, we have to model that for our parishes. And the leaders from the parishes that were there today, I really think they're going to take it back, and they're going to do something with it and make it their own, which is beautiful. And that's all we want to have happen today. And then that's going to have a ripple effect. Got some great ideas about what they're going to do with it later.
Some good ideas. And, I did just make the joke, like, it's shocking that we jumped to say yes, but that actually leads to something else. We said yes because we wanted to, but also how many people are wanting to tell their stories? They're just not being asked to tell them.
Right. And I think sometimes it isn't even the ask, right? Because I think part of us as a culture, so social media has a great impact on us, and we put things out there and we can be afraid of it, et cetera. There are people that need to hear the stories we have, and not that they're going to ask about them, right? So people will find themselves in all kinds of circumstances as you engage with them. So Lee, you said it right. And that's really missionary discipleship, right? It's around making one disciple for Christ at a time. Most of this will happen one-on-one, right? Not necessarily in the larger group, which we did today, which I have such an appreciation for my colleagues. Listening to some of the stories I heard today. Mike, you're going to wish you were here. Oh, well, you missed.
Oh, wait. You mean to use it against them? Maybe.
No.
Okay.
Nothing like that. They're beautiful stories that were told today. But I think in thinking about our stories, right, and that's why, and we've already talked about this, is knowing the entirety of a story. Like Jen did a great job talking about like the story mountain, which you should really talk about so the listeners can understand the story mountain. But like to know every part of every element of the story, because you're just going to give, sometimes it's just a nugget of your story that's going to be a seed that gets planted in someone, and it gives them hope, and it gives them a reason to believe, and it gives them a reason to know whatever, like particularly if this is a hard season, this season you're not alone. And so others have survived this ahead of me. I hear how Jen did it or how Lee did it. Or Mike. I'll say Mike because he's sitting at the table. I'm going to say it. But I just think there's just tremendous power and an ability to build connection. And the thing I would also say, we're kind of inside the Catholic bubble a little bit. We're sitting here on a Catholic podcast and we're talking to these beautiful PCLs who have amazing work. But there's plenty of people listening to this who don't work for the Catholic Church, who are Catholic, who there are way more lay people out in the world than there are those of us who work for the church, than there are priests. We have to bring, just like the first century disciples and those early apostles, we have to bring the story into the places where people who work for the church and priests are not. That's the call. Tell your story out there. Tell the story of Jesus and your story of Jesus.
One of the tools that Lee had suggested is that when you're thinking about telling your story, I love this because it's so easy to wrap your mind around, right? Like if you know you have a story to tell, but you don't know how to tell it, think about it, and you said like 3 steps. There's the normal, there's the explosion, or somebody in the crowd said like the aha moment, and then there's the new normal. And I think that if you can even think about putting your story in just that kind of a framework, it's easier to tell the story.
I think it's a helpful place to start, and then what you had shared allows you to put more layers around that. That framework I borrowed from, there's a book called Stories That Stick. It's by Kendra Hall, and it's a business book. It's a book for business leaders who are trying to build relationships and get customers and get people paying attention, and they need and her recommendations on how to tell stories about your business that are going to attract others to it. So in a way, that's what we're talking about here, right? In a very crude way, but there's a lot to be borrowed from that, and I think the key in that framework is that, yes, it's the normal before everything, before a certain event, the explosion, that aha moment, and then the new normal afterwards. But it's not going to come out in that progression. You're probably going to start with the explosion. You're probably going to start with the experience that knocked you. And then with reflection, you're going to talk about how you felt in the immediacy after that event, and then with time, how you look back on it. And then you can build up the beginning. And it was interesting, I shared that model with my colleagues while they were preparing their stories ahead of time, and it was Bill who said to me that he knew what his explosion was, but he knew if he started with that, that he needed to set the scene for why it impacted him the way he did. And he had to go back far in his life to say why. So I truly appreciated that, and it being reinforced that, okay, this model makes sense. And then Jen was able to put more layers to it that helped us unpack it even further.
Well, yeah, so I just explained, there is such thing called a story mountain, and it has about 5 parts to it. And so actually just envision an actual mountain.
I have a question.
Yes.
Where did that come from? Because I've been a writer and a reporter for a long time, and I've never heard the concept.
You've never heard that?
I'm just out of curiosity. Where did you first pull that from?
I actually heard it in college.
Really?
Yeah.
See, I didn't go to J school, so I was not maybe a J school thing.
I was I was a journalism major and an English minor. So about as many writing courses as you can take. But Story Mountain I learned in my English minor.
Okay.
Because it usually basically any book that you read or movie that you see follows this kind of a template. Mm-hmm. So I was pulling out stuff out of my old brain from 25 years ago, like the black hole.
The black hole.
And so this was one of them. So the Story Mountain. So imagine yourself standing in front of a mountain, and the very bottom would be like the beginning. So that's the beginning of your story, right? This is the introduction to the world of the story. How does it begin? You would introduce the characters and settings here. And next is the build-up, like rising action. Now you're starting to take those first few steps up the mountain. And these are the events that are interrupting the everyday world, or maybe even a rising tension that leads us to the explosion, the pinnacle of the mountain, the climax. It could be a major dilemma. It can be, and by dilemma, it doesn't have to be, I kept saying like a monster because I couldn't think of something better, right? I watch a lot of horror movies, I guess. But you know, to me, in my story, my major dilemma was more fear, shyness, not a public speaker. And so, because that's what my story involved. And then, so now you're at the explosion, the aha moment, and then you start coming back down the mountain. So you have the falling action, like what happened right after the big explosion? Did the characters overcome? And then the ending. You know, was there a moral to the story, or the meaning of the story as it finishes? And then so if you think about your story in those 5 terms, the beginning, a build-up, the explosion, falling action, and an ending, you can kind of plot your story. Like you might know your story in your mind, like you were saying mm-hmm. with Bill Watson, mm-hmm. and then no, I lost my train of thought. I need a story mountain.
Are you saying you fell off the mountain?
I may have fallen off the mountain,
okay.
But
she's in the abyss.
Exactly.
She's coming out.
But when I was plotting out my story, which is something that happened in my life, I was like, oh, I'll start at the beginning, and it turns out my beginning wasn't where I thought it was. My beginning actually turned out to be the build-up, the first couple of steps up the mountain. Because I can't take the first few steps up the mountain if I haven't given the story context. Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh, hold on. I have to back up and introduce everybody to these characters. And then one thing that I always tell any writer, especially in journalism, there's nothing more daunting than sitting and looking at a blank piece of paper or a blank computer screen. That is why I never start at the beginning. I always start... Well, not always, but a lot of times I start at the explosion.
Yep.
And I work either backwards or forwards. Because if you're hurrying through the beginning of the story or through the buildup to get to the explosion, it's going to feel rushed and it's going to feel insufficient. There was a better word I was thinking, not insecure, but insincere. It's going to feel that word. So that was what I kept trying to get across. And then also, I think the other thing I kept... harping on and it was funny because when I was practicing, my husband was like, "You're using that analogy too much. Get rid of it." And then I was like, "All right." And then today, at least, like, keep talking about the puzzle pieces. I'm like, see, I know what I'm doing. Why did I listen to him?
Exactly.
You have to tell Anthony tonight. You're like, you know what? Your advice was wrong, Anthony.
Poor Anthony.
I'll be
Poor
honest.
Anthony.
He was a champ because I was trying to literally practice, and I didn't have a podium in my house, so I put the computer on top of a toaster so that it would be at my eye level because we were Zooming, and I did it that way. And he's like, "What? Are you standing on something?" I'm like, "No, it's on top of a toaster." And he was like, "Remember to clean that toaster later. I don't know where that computer's been because it's always working or out in the field."
Yeah.
So, but yeah, the puzzle pieces and what I was saying about having your blank piece of paper or your blank screen is that never erase anything, never delete anything, because a lot of those times when you first write that first draft or even the first sentence or couple, you actually end up coming back to that. Mm-hmm. I can't remember how many times I've deleted something and then try to undo it, and it's like it's gone because it was like 2 hours ago. You can only undo so many times. And I like to think about them as the puzzle pieces. You don't even know what the puzzle is yet. You don't know what the picture is. So if you're getting rid of pieces before you see what the picture is, you're never going to finish it. So I just push everything to the side or the bottom.
I think what hopefully today, we hope today did a lot of things, but one of them that I think is really important is that you might have a whole bunch of stories that you want to tell, which is wonderful, but today forced you to organize them. It forced you to identify when they happened in your life, and it forced you to pick one and to put it into a framework so that it's a good story to tell, so it tells well. And I think sometimes while we have personal experiences that we want to share, we get hung up because it's all over the place. And maybe the setup didn't need to be that long, but if you take the time to organize it, and that's the key. It's a commitment. I mean, we're asking, it's like, I could tell stories about why I stay. And that's awesome, and I'm glad you have them at the ready. But are they organized in such a way that when you tell them, the listener's going to want to listen and is really impacted by it, or do they get hung up and, oh my God, all she kept talking about was the beginning part.
Right.
And tell me more about the explosion. And,
Right.
and we didn't do that. I didn't do that.
Which it maybe is something to consider for your presentation, because since we have proven, I'm not a writer nor am I a journalist. I am, however.
Why are
PR
you the director of communications?
He's a journalist. Don't listen to him, listeners. He is a journalist.
I have a master's degree in public relations.
Oh,
we have a completely different philosophy when it comes to writing.
Yes.
But one of those things is, and maybe it might marry to the points you guys have talked about. We write to the audience. So I actually change the story depending on who I'm talking to, which is another thing to consider. It may not have come up today, but making sure that you're not necessarily telling the same story to the same person. You're telling a different story or you're telling the same story to a different person. Therefore, you need to hit different points, which is like the conversations we have in our life. But be comfortable with the idea of it's not just your story, it's also how it's being received, and maybe what you're going to have to tailor your story to, so that it has that full impact and in some cases without turning people off. Right. So in PR, our motto is write tight.
Right.
So we usually start with the end and then fill in everything afterwards, which is why I have such difficulty writing for the Catholic Star Herald, because she likes a lot of words, and I like as few as humanly
To be
possible.
honest, that is a complaint that I have heard often about myself from other editors. Can you wrap that up? Land the plane is what Pete Sanchez says. I need to go land the plane. But you bring up a good point, and that is something that we talked about is, your reminder of purpose when you're telling your stories. And we talked about finding what your story's purpose is and who is the audience, because if your story is going to be different or told different if you're talking to children, to young adults, to academics, the wording that you use is going to be different. And then ask yourself, what do you want the reader to feel, and what do you want them to remember most? And be okay with the idea. Give yourself the flexibility to say, what I think the person should take away from the story might not be what the person takes away from the story, but that's okay, because we're all different. We're all individuals. All of these stories are going to impact us in different ways.
In different ways. And we tried to emphasize that too, the uniqueness of our journeys, because they are unique. And but just because they're unique journeys doesn't mean there's the opportunity for relatability, for connection, because that's there no matter what. There's going to be elements of your story that the listener will be able to connect to. That's what's key. And that's what I think we overlook a lot in our fear of sharing a story, because they're not going to get it. Well, I think people are going to surprise you. And we heard that today. We definitely heard that today.
It goes back to the thread. We're all threads, then we become...
We make a stronger rope.
Yeah, there you go.
Right? Because that's really... And it's something for people to hang on to, is that strong rope.
Oh, my
And then they get
goodness.
incorporated in to the rope.
Yeah.
You belong as part of this rope, and your stories matter here too. It all goes back to like the sacrament of the present moment and being fully present, because you're touching somebody in that moment. God is part of that engagement. So what does that person need from you? And we keep talking about telling our stories. If we just think about the stories that people have shared with us over our lifetime, right? These holy moment stories and how they impacted us. That too. I mean, if you're struggling to sort of tell your story, even the write tight, like if I wanted to tell my story sort of shorter, if I think about some of the people in my lifetime who have shared their stories with me, and you're just like, I'm completely blown away by that story. That was amazing, right? So I think that's where, and again, to give the world some hope and something to believe in, we have to share these things. There's not enough connection these days. Nope. People are lonely, people are sad, people are wounded, and this is a way to sort of build up community.
And those connections, Donna, you brought this to light. The connection that two humans have in the exchange of the story, it's not only connecting with each other, it's connecting with the Lord. And that's where we're like, oh, wait a minute, this is going to help my relationship with God. And hey, maybe that inspires a curiosity, a wanting to re-engage if they haven't been re-engaged, or just to look at maybe something about the church differently that they hadn't looked at before. Those are all elements that's going to get you closer to God.
3 people today had a very similar message who were not, they were asked to, give their talks, and they had not collaborated in those talks at all. But 3 people had the same message, and it's what you just said. Say it again, Donna, about needing
what
hope.
part was that again,
needing
Jen?
hope in the world and putting say that again.
So what I think is significant around our stories is, what does the world need?
Right.
The world needs hope, and it needs something to believe in.
Right.
And the only thing to believe in is Jesus. And so how do we help people do that?
3 separate people said that today.
Yep. In
Dr.
their own
Bill
way.
Watson
Yep.
said it in his own way. Father Hughes, our diocesan vicar general and moderator of the Curia, said it literally, almost exactly like you do, and the other person. But
Yes.
I don't
Remember,
can't out
one of our
everybody.
guests, one of our
Yeah,
attendees.
right.
Yes.
Father Hughes gave his witness
He did.
talk as well?
He did.
Wow.
He
That's
did.
interesting. Okay, I have to ask him about that tomorrow. It's something else I think it might be important for people to hear, at least our listeners. I'm sure you touched on this during the event as well. It's okay if it doesn't work the first time. It's okay if it's not a miraculous turn of events. Sometimes it might take days, weeks, years, even for that story to really root and then bear fruit. So it's okay if it doesn't happen right away. Don't be discouraged if you don't get an immediate reaction from it. Just telling the story, putting it out there, planting that seed really makes a big difference. I'm amazed at how often I will think back to things that I've been told decades ago that I suddenly realize now that I'm a different place in my life. I'm like, that's the point they were making. Okay, now I get it. So yeah, don't be. I guess what we've collectively have been saying is don't be scared. Tell a good story. It's okay, and it'll take practice too. Your first story may not be that great. My first story, I can remember to this day, my first written story for a newspaper. It was 3,000 words long.
And you're asking me about being tight.
Yeah, but over the course of 30 years, I have learned my lesson.
I had
never gone to J school, so I didn't know any of that stuff. So I've been a history major.
Nobody read that till the end.
The first 3,000 word story I ever wrote was here for the Catholic Star Herald that I was asked to write.
That's right. We kept telling you to extend it.
Yes, keep writing. And I was like, I have never written anything in my life. Now I know why.
There you
It's because
go.
it was your first.
There you go. So in the beginning, your story's going to change over the years. You'll find different points. Like Jen found out earlier, she thought she knew her story and she didn't know her story. So sometimes you got to tell it to actually understand it. And pay attention to how other people tell their stories. You don't have to tell it the same way, but you may find that the way some people tell their stories are great. But you also may find that you don't have the capacity to tell the story in that way, and that's fine. You'll tell it in your own way. But be sort of open-minded and steal ideas where necessary and borrow from others. And as I often say, good writers borrow, great writers steal. It's just something to look at. But the whole point is getting the story out there and telling people, and in this case, quite literally evangelizing, whether it's internally or externally, and making sure that people understand the mission of Jesus and the presence of Jesus in our lives and in our souls.
I'd like to give Mike a compliment now, though I'm loath to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. What you said about planting a seed, like telling your story and maybe not getting kind of the response you thought that you might get from it, and that it's like planting a seed, right? So there's the scripture passage of the sower. So a lot of times I just think, okay, we're all just supposed to be these holy Johnny Appleseeds, and we have no idea. Lee, how many times do we say we're never going to pluck our own fruit?
Yep.
And it's really not our fruit anyway.
Yep.
The fruit belongs to Jesus. The working in the vineyard belongs to us. So think of your stories as seeds. You have no idea how they'll germinate in someone.
That's true.
So that was a really good point you made.
I feel like this is 2 science podcasts we've done in a row. One on physics and now one on biology. I like this. This is good.
See, church and science do mix.
I say that all the time. Well, listen, I'm very happy that it was the three of you giving this presentation. Not to tell stories out of school, but Jen could not have been more nervous about this. However,
couldn't tell.
I had no doubt that she was going to be wildly successful because that's the type of person she is. So it's good to hear that happened. And I hope you guys will do this again soon, maybe with an entirely different. This sounds like something that can be easily packaged for a number of different
for sure.
groups within the diocese. So let's keep giving all of our faithful Catholics good toolkits to work with. So thank you all for being on the podcast today. Thank you for all your great work.
Thank you.
And thank you for staying a little later after the event so we could record this. And to everyone else, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week. See you, everybody.